All right, so I have a few use cases that we can sort of go through. We have partners that are working in all of these use cases, and we can go into as much detail as you want. But really, in the interest of time, what I would love to really spend our time on is talking about what you guys are looking at doing, whether it's on blockchain or not blockchain. What are you guys doing with data? What are you sort of struggling with data? What are the use cases you're trying to solve for? So I'll talk a little bit about some of these use cases, but really would love to just kind of have a discussion with you guys about what you guys are thinking and working on and all that. So the first one I'll go into, we've talked a lot about identity. And really what this boils down to is all of the data about you as a person. And that data can come from anywhere. So in your EMR record, you've got a certain chunk of data. You probably have multiple EMR records that are living in all sorts of different places that currently are probably not connected to each other. But then you have other data about yourself as well. So you may have a Fitbit device. That's part of your identity, believe it or not. That data from your Fitbit device is data about you that you own, or really should own. Right now, you kind of, really Fitbit owns it, but what we are building is the ability to actually manage direct ownership of that data. So in some cases, let's say your EMR record, there may be a chunk of data in there that's an A1C score. You may own that outright, solely just you own that. If there's a regulatory provision or a HIPAA consent or a co-ownership with you and your provider, say you co-own it with your provider because your provider prescribed that test, so they're a co-owner of that A1C. There may actually be use cases where, say, Quest Diagnostics has certain rights to that A1C score. Then there may be Fitbit data in your overall record that's being pulled in because your doctor prescribed a Fitbit. You may co-own that data with Fitbit. There may be patient-reported data in an app that you use. You solely own that. Nobody else owns that data. It's just your patient-reported data. But there may be something in there that says, Amber's a difficult patient. I may not have any rights to that data because that may be data that my provider uses to manage their business, right? So that's not part of my health record. That's not part of my identity. But really what identity is all about is all of that data that you own, that's about you, that you control. All of that data is part of your identity. It's much bigger than a driver's license. It's much bigger than just one point in this system. So really what we believe is that your identity is this mix of data from a government ID, from your EMR, from a personalized medicine test that you did, say 23andMe, from you have a bank account, you maybe own a piece of property. All of that information about you becomes part of your sovereign identity that you own, that you control, and that you decide how you use that data. And so you can use sovereign identity in any number of a million different ways. So the really great use case that we look at is you go in and you apply for a line of credit at a bank. There's a certain amount of your identity that you want and need to share as part of your request for a line of credit. And that's really an agreement between you and the bank. What do they feel like they need? What do you feel like you're willing to provide? What do the regulations allow them to ask for? What are the limits of that? All of that really boils down to what part of my sovereign identity am I willing to share? So I'll go on to the next one. So the next one is chain of custody. And this one is sort of similarly broad. We have a number of partners that are using this in a couple of different ways. The big one that I will focus on is personalized medicine. So let's say, for example, you are running a personalized medicine company and you have a test, you have a sample collection kit. Say you're collecting blood samples. You have a sample collection kit. You need to be able to trace that sample collection kit to the customer who purchased the test so that you know what kit they received. You need to be able to then trace that back to your lab, so transportation tracking back to your lab. You need to be able to process that in a LIMS system usually, so you've got LIMS data, Lab Information Management System, whatever, data that's going through as you're processing that sample from physical sample into data. And then that data gets transferred back to the consumer that purchased the test. And now that consumer owns that chunk of data. That becomes part of their sovereign identity. That whole process is chain of custody. How do you manage from raw material or from manufacturing a product all the way to data, and then even downstream of that. So a really good sort of example of this is, I'll go back to the personalized medicine test. So you can manage the raw material that goes into the manufacture of your collection device, and you have a completed collection device, and you have a lot of completed collection devices. Those go to a number of consumers. All of that is traceable. Those consumers take that test, they give the sample, it gets traced back to the lab, it's run through the lab. You have requirements and protocol adherence. Are we making sure that we're actually following specific protocols to make sure we have a robust result? You have a result. The result is owned and transferred to the consumer. And then you're giving consumer control over that data. Let's say that consumer decides they want to send that data to a research program. They want to participate in some academic research. So they send that data. Let's say they even monetize it. So I'm going to send my data to this researcher doing this program that I really care about. They send me $50. Everybody's happy. Let's say you find out much, much later that they have a bad lot of sample collection devices. And you need to go and figure out if that bad lot impacted anything down the line. If you have true chain of custody and everything is attested and immutable on blockchain, and you have these complex relationship matrices that help you understand how that one blood collection kit is related to everything else downstream of it, it makes it so much easier to say, did this lot affect my laboratory processing, my protocol, and how I process the sample? Did it impact the data that came out of this? And even downstream, did it impact any of the research that was performed on the data from this lot, as opposed to every other lot? It makes it so much easier to do that kind of processing and analytics on how one thing in your system impacts everything else around it. So, next one. So the next one is clinical trials. And there are, again, this is an area where there's like 5 million different ways that this applies. But really, when we look at, so when we think about a global network where individuals truly own their own data and have control over how that data is accessed and used and how they derive value from that data, clinical trials right now functionally usually go through a physician. So if you want to participate in a clinical trial, you go to your provider and you say, I'm interested in learning, or I've tried everything else, I want to try a clinical trial. And they decide, essentially, whether you're a good candidate or not. This is actually really problematic for pharmaceutical companies because it means that they don't necessarily get candidates for clinical trials who are well suited to that clinical trial. They're sort of beholden to the provider to tell them who is suitable for that trial or not. And that provider may not actually be right. So with global data networks and sovereign identity for individual people, it allows individual people to engage directly with a clinical trial or an academic research program or any kind of service, could be a commercial service, but in this case a clinical trial, and engage directly to say, you know what, I'm willing to share with you some small chunk of my identity. Say it's a subset of my overall genetic profile. Say, like, you just want to know if am I BRCA positive or negative, do I have a BRCA mutation? You can share just that subset of data, and that company can say, yes, you're a good candidate, or no, you're a good candidate, based on the subset of your data that you decided to share with us. And you can say, I'm going to share it with you for 1 day, just so that you can make that determination, and then turn off your access. So it totally changes the paradigm about how individuals and companies engage with each other and create relationships to decide whether there's something of value that they can partner on, right? You're partnering with a clinical trial sponsor company. Yeah?
If my data is stored on-chain in the VPC and BurstIQ goes to the phone, how do I then share the data that I own about myself?
So you have the ability to pull your data out. So a data owner has the ability to pull their data out of the network. So next, so these are obvious, we've talked about consent contracts. Consent contracts are the basis for how you do informed consent in a clinical trial. So things like trigger-based consents are really critical in clinical trials because it allows you to provide, let's say you have to provide education to a person before they receive access to a certain chunk of data, so access to a test result, for example. You have attestation and immutability on the chain that verifies that this person received some information or went through a course or provided an electronic signature, and only after that chunk of data shows up in the chain do you release a test result. So that's a really common use case. So we've talked a lot about analytics and how you actually can use on-chain analytics to drive deeper learning in clinical trials and more informed segmentation of clinical trials, especially as trials get more complex. And then on and on and on and on and on. I'm not going to go into the rest of that. So next one. So the last one I'm going to talk about is patient engagement. So this is really informed by how much data you have about a person. The amount of data that you have access to, the amount of data that someone decides to share, can really help you provide much more personalized care, much more personalized insights. So, for example, so this is a true use case, not theoretical. So we have a company that is using this to manage medication compliance. And really what they said is we need to verify that we don't want to just trust that we're going to prescribe this medication and that this person is going to go and be compliant and then it's going to do all good things for them. We need the data to make sure that they're actually compliant and that it's actually working. Because if it's not working, we need to change course. So they pull data from mobile applications, from prescription data and pharmacy data. They have full EMR and clinical data, and they have population level data from public health sources. And they use all of that data to run machine learning and create truly personalized care plans so that they can ensure that the people they're prescribing to are compliant and that it's actually working. So I'm going to stop. I want to talk about what you guys are working on, but before I do that, I'm going to pass it to Angie, and then we can kind of just open it up and we can talk about questions and use cases and what you guys are trying to solve for.